Do you enjoy the sounds of synthesizers, British accents, and electronic drum machines in your music?
Did you or your older siblings own cassette tapes of groups like Depeche Mode, The Cure, Flock of Seagulls, and Yaz?
If you answered yes to these questions, you might be a New Wave fan, and you might be a Xennial. And we are too. Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Danny. And you are listening to Generation In Between, a Xennial podcast. Woo, what was that?
I don't know.
We are a Xennial podcast, not the other word I just said, where we revisit, remember, and sometimes relearn or learn for the first time, as we're going to do a little bit of today. All kinds of things from our 80s childhoods and 90s teen/young adulthoods.
Yes. And if you couldn't tell by our intro today, we are talking about New Wave music.
Woo-hoo.
And we have a special guest with us today to talk about that. And that is my husband and our amazing sound engineer, Brant. Welcome, Brant.
Yay, he's so excited.
Older siblings? Am I in the wrong place here?
Well, we should start there because we do
should.
this with every guest.
We do.
We
Okay.
ask, are you a Xennial? So you'd be born between 77 and 83. I mean, I know the answer, but tell our
I'm
listeners.
glad you explained that because I don't know what a Xennial is, but no, I am not.
Okay, so which generation do you align with?
I don't align with it.
Oh,
I don't like the generation that
don't
I'm
give
aligned
him
with.
labels.
Yeah.
If you want me to go off on what I feel about my generation, no, I guess technically Generation X, but
Okay. All right.
I don't want to be included in that.
So you were, oh, here come all the Gen Xers, unless they agree. That's at Brant, by the way, not us. So you would have been then, well, you'll get into this. The music we're talking about, this would have been like your teenage years when it started, when you got
Well, what
interested in New Wave.
started was when I was younger, but yeah, it was teenage when I discovered it and
Okay.
started listening to it.
Okay, great. So we're going to just kind of follow your lead today. I don't know if you want to tell us anything else about yourself before we get
Yes.
started. What's your history with music, with radio, all
the
of that?
I mean, I guess my history of this is just listening to it since high school, working as a DJ in Orlando, playing this music for 10 years on Real Radio 104.1, which was number one during the week, not on the weekends. I worked on the weekends. I think we were number one once.
You really
One-
do have to
throw that in.
clarify.
Yeah.
You have to
One
clarify.
one ratings book, our music was number one in the demos that you want in radio. But so I've been around this music, not just listening to it, but also trying to turn other people onto it. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully.
He's
As he points to
pointing at
Katie.
me. Yeah, he's pointing at me. Yes.
I have to tell you though, when we mentioned Depeche Mode and was it
yeah,
Depeche
it
Mode
was
or the Cure?
Depeche Mode.
In whatever episode Troy was listening to it, he's like, and Katie said she didn't like it. He turned the podcast off and put on their greatest hits.
See?
I know.
I'm turning away listeners with my musical tastes.
Depeche Mode saved my life. Katie would care if they didn't exist, basically.
I can't believe you don't like them.
Okay. It's not that I don't like them. I just don't always like to listen to them.
Okay, that's
Ever.
fair. Which means between days that start end in Y.
To be
right?
fair, she listens to some of the music
I do.
that I grew up
I
with
actually do.
that she never
Yeah.
heard before she met me, but Depeche Mode is not one of the
Okay.
ones.
It's
That's
not
okay.
one in like my personal rotation.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
allowed to like what you like.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I was not trying to throw shade to you.
I'm all mad.
Your
now.
husband can throw
I'm like,
shade
bye.
to you.
No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
All right. Well, go on. So tell us about New Wave music. What do we need to know?
Well, tell me what you think new wave music is.
Oh, should I go first or you?
Yeah.
And you
Should
can't
we
say
call-
Depeche Mode.
Can we call attention though, real quick, to the other sound effects that may be picking up and may not be?
Yes. Literally, the roof is being replaced, not just at the studio, but above the room where we currently are. There's hammering and all sorts of things. So you probably can hear it. I don't know.
Construction time again. Depeche Mode listeners will know that one.
Nice.
Oh, okay. So it's on theme. Okay. So you asked us what we know about New Wave music.
Or not what you know,
Okay.
just what you would consider it. Because I actually am
Okay.
shocked because I did not know the answer.
Okay.
I won't answer because I was reading up on Wikipedia before I came. So
Well, pretend
dare
you're still ignorant. What did you
Okay.
think before you read Wikipedia?
I don't know. I feel like I think what I
And
thought
I
about
disagree with
New Wave.
Wikipedia, but go on.
I think what I thought about New Wave was what it was became something different than the label it was given, if that makes sense. But I'm gonna let you answer before I go to.
Yeah, I mean, mine's much more like bigger picture, not very specific. Just I would be like, it's like very emotional music, often slow, alternative. I often think of like British singers or groups. Not really pop music. I guess some of it crossed over, but like what you would think was kind of like on the fringes of what would be popular. Is kind of what I think.
Popular by accident. Part of my lure of new wave is I hate popular music. And because as a rule, I think when a lot of people like a lot of things, that means it's not very good.
That if you know Brant, you know this is true. People will be like, I love whatever. And he's like, not me.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is.
If it's popular, I'm suspicious. That shouldn't be popular.
I will say he likes pizza and Christmas. So there is that. And those would be popular. So I'm just saying.
That's great.
But go on.
Okay.
The thing with new wave music is, and I didn't know what Wikipedia was going to say when I looked it up. It was if you look at the official definition of it, by the time I was listening to it, it wasn't called new wave anymore. Like the official definition of what people say is that it was kind of post-punk. It was actually American at first, like Blondie, Talking Heads, those kind of things.
I'm just giggling at the roof. Sorry.
Oh, not just laughing at me.
No, I'm not. I'm giggling at the roof.
But I think you can. I think the accepted idea of what new wave is now. Like if you listen to Sirius XM, their station is called First Wave, which is a play off of that. They play a whole bunch of different things. It's very eclectic if you actually look at what each band is. There's synth pop, there's alt rock, there's dark wave, there's goth, there are bands that are like typical bands. You had 4-piece bands that just happened to be in the 80s and they became college rock or they became alt rock when really they were just rock bands. But that all kind of got grouped into new wave. It all kind of got grouped into the fashion of new wave, which was different because, as you know, the 80s were just gaudy and grotesque with all the colors and all those things. And this was the opposite of that. Right. This was people in black. This was people gender bending, wearing ambiguous clothing and just kind of not what everybody else was wearing. And that became considered new wave. So it was more of a culture thing and it was a music thing. And so new wave, I don't even know if there's a definition. So we call this show new wave and everybody knows new wave, but I don't know what some people would say some bands are new wave. Others would say, oh no, they're not new wave. Gotcha. It just depends on who you talk to. But I guess for the all encompassing thing, this would be the music that was prevalent to the alternative community in the late 70s and 80s and into the early 90s.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of where, when I looked at the Wikipedia definition, I was like, oh, some of that check. But then I was like, that doesn't seem right, but I don't know because I'm no expert. So I was like, I can't wait to see what Brant says. I can't wait.
And I'm not an expert. And this is my experience with it. And, I grew up in Podunk, Ohio, where we had no access to anything. And, and then in Miami where I had limited access to this, but I had friends that had found it. It's not like you have to always remember it was so hard to find music, even for us compared to you guys.
Yeah, true.
And you just didn't hear it if it wasn't on the radio. There were 2 radio stations in America that were playing this, and it was WLIR in New York and K-Rock in LA.
Nice.
And then by the mid 80s, MTV was playing it on Sunday night at midnight with 120 minutes. And then there were crossover groups, and we can talk over on some of those that did come into new wave, but it was really hard to find this music. So while we were being force-fed pop music everywhere, you had to work to hear this, and that kind of came along with it also.
So it was sort of like exclusive in a way, because it wasn't easy to get to. So, and if you really wanted to, you had to work really hard. So there was like a little bit of, I don't know, maybe like ownership of that too, of like being part of that culture, because there was that component too. You couldn't just turn on the radio and listen to it. Yeah.
I mean, there's a counterculture to it. You remember what the 80s were like? I don't know if you guys do, but like we had terrible president and we had like the worst president in history in Ronald Reagan, and Britain had one of its worst prime ministers in history in Margaret Thatcher. Oh. And they were just so, and I know you would disagree, but the royal family is so terrible. And
no, they're terrible. I'm just fascinated by them.
And so those are kind of the factors that went into this also. And you had AIDS that was killing people, but it was killing gay people, so they didn't care about it in the White House, and they didn't care about it in whatever house that Margaret Thatcher lives in, and so you had a community that was facing this and making music for it, but more so the community of people that wanted to embrace something different and not be the pastels and the what passed for 80s music. And alongside you had people who had no musical talent that had ideas, and you could do that with synthesizers easier than learning how to play a guitar.
Yeah.
You could learn you didn't have to learn how to play the drums. You could have a drum machine. And so you were able to express maybe some of these ideas without having to have a lot of music. And then those people then eventually maybe learned how to do music, but technology was changing also. And some people wanted to embrace that in their music also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every time when I think of new wave music, that is what I think of is electronic music items. I don't know what they're called. I mean, they're instruments, right?
Synthesizers.
Yeah, synthesizers is what I think of. Drum machines, like that's what I think of. Like my sister loved Yaz, and like I was listening to them to prepare for today, and that's what I think of. Like,
well, Yaz or Yazoo, depending on which country.
Yeah, true facts. By the time she found them, it was Yaz. So, but that's what I think of. And I think it's interesting you said like this was like anti-establishment music, which is what punk rock was. So this was like the kind of the next era.
This was less aggressive.
Well,
I don't even know if it meant to be anti-establishment, but I mean, life, especially when you're a teenager, life sucks.
Yeah, for real.
And you're depressed and the world, and it was bad in the 80s. You had when I was growing up, you learned about nuclear war on every corner. You always thought there was going to be, there could be a bomb any day. And so you're worried about that. And then, we were so repressed sexually from AIDS and STDs, and that was a scare on us. So like our growing up was just like, in fear. And you had music now that was different. That wasn't just poppy love songs. That wasn't dance hubbaloo that was on 80s pop radio. And you had stuff that actually had like thought to it. And a lot of people that listen to it, we can go back. A lot of my friends also listen to things like the Beatles and groups that the later Beatles, not the poppy Beatles, but like when the Beatles got smart and wrote intelligently and really, locked themselves in a studio, and you had lyrics and you had words and things had meaning, and it wasn't just gobbledygook that
capitalism.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't just spitting out things. And and one of the things that I was learning through this is and we'll go in all the different things, but you could consider Prince new wave on some of the stuff he did. The Go-Go's were considered new wave when they first came out. Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was funny because when we were talking about doing this, I knew it was coming up. And I was like, oh, I got to start thinking about this. Cyndi Lauper's song was on MTV2 or whatever we have. And I was like, that's actually kind of, that really wasn't pop music for what, and so you can consider like some of that new wave. So some of it broke over, some of it crossed over just once or twice. Some bands never really crossed over, but there's like that fringe element. But if you really wanted to be immersed in it, it wasn't mainstream.
Yeah, but then it became mainstream, right? It kind of took. I think of Friends. You remember that episode of Friends where they had the flashback and Matthew Perry Chandler, he was in his flock of seagulls phase, so he had the hair. Yes.
Well, that's the thing that's interesting. And also, shout out to Mike Score of Flock of Seagulls. He lives probably 10 minutes from here.
What?
Yeah, he lives in Rockledge. And he was a hairdresser, and that was where the hair came from. But
I loved it.
In the early 80s, and it's called the Second British Invasion, and it kind of coincides with MTV. And you had some of these bands that were considered new wave, that would have been considered new wave, that made it because of the videos. So you had, you had Dexy's Midnight Runners, you had Human League, Duran, which, believe it or not, even though they were kind of a little poppy, they were considered at one point to be more new wave. The Police, which was an amazing band, but they were different. But they kind of benefited from that first wave. So in the early 80s, you actually had some of these bands that were known for a song or two, like A Flock of Seagulls, which I don't leave. Iran's not my favorite song of theirs. Space Age Love Song is. But their one song gets on MTV and got a lot of play. And so those kind of things. So you had bits and pieces of it that came across, but it was not everything came across.
Got it.
And then later in the late 80s, you probably had a year or two there where, Depeche Mode finally cracked through with Violator. The Cure was cracking through with their songs, even if it was like a terrible song like Friday I'm in Love, it still like came through. And then Nirvana came and everything got messed up and
then
it was all
grunge.
gone. And then
And
grunge.
then grunge. Yes, exactly.
And the famous chord from Nirvana played and everything changed. But Nirvana, actually, that song debuted on 120 Minutes.
Yes.
Because it was, alternative.
Yeah.
But that changed everything.
That changed too, because alternative became mainstream then too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So are there any groups that you often hear lumped into New Wave that you don't personally think are?
I mean, I don't think so. It's just a matter so when you think about the biggest bands, and I actually took a list off of Ranker,
okay.
and this is what people voted for, and you have like the top band they have is The Cure, who are really almost gothic.
Yeah, that's what I was.
But they're also, it's moody. It's a different kind of music. And you have Depeche Mode, which was in the 80s, was completely synth. And I was going to say, when you said Yazoo or Yaz, that was started by Vince Clarke, who actually started Depeche Mode and did their first album, which was really kind of dance poppy. And that actually put Depeche Mode on the charts in like 1979. Just Can't Get Enough was a big hit here in America. And then he left and did Yaz with Allison, was it Moyer, I think. And they did two albums together and then moved on. And then he found Andrew Bell, and they've been together since. And that's Erasure, which Katie really likes Erasure. And we've actually seen them in concert.
I love Erasure.
And that's like synth pop,
yes.
almost completely dance synth pop. So it's like, it's the same as Depeche Mode, except for it's not the dark, dreary, the world is bad. And it's more of the pop side. But that's Depeche Mode, and you're grouping them in with The Cure. And then number 3, you have New Order, which was just straight dance, and that came out of post-punk Joy Division, which was completely depressing. And then Ian Curtis killed himself, and they regrouped and became New Order, and then kind of led this whole electronic movement, which ended up turning into EDM and the whole path that way. But they actually had a real bass player along with the synth. And then you have the Smiths, which some people put on like a new wave list, some people don't. It's not on the Ranker list. They were just a 4-man band that hated each other, that had like 4 years of great music, and then that was it.
They hated each other then or later?
All the time.
Oh.
But I mean, if you know Morrissey, it makes sense. He's turned out to be kind of a
he's kind of
a xenophobic jerk, but
I've heard a few things,
But they were great lyrics, but they were just a rock band. And you have like REM, which can be considered new wave or it can be considered college rock. They finally broke through right before Nirvana with Losing My Religion and those kind of things. But so they're all different. So if you want to tell me something's new wave, I'll probably just be like, yeah, except for like Britney Spears or something. But but like most bands, like you can consider maybe they had influence by new wave and just people didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's your favorite few?
Favorite band?
Yeah.
Oh, Depeche Mode.
Okay.
Hands down.
Got it.
That's like that's everything to me.
So tell us, I know you have some stories about Depeche Mode that the listeners would probably like to hear. Like, I think there's one about you listening to it at your friends or something like that. Yeah.
So I was in high school and like I said, I came from a really repressed Ohio background and just was trying to find myself and spent the early part of my time in Miami listening to like classic rock, which wasn't terrible. It was still better than what was on Y100.
Well, just to kind of interject quickly, I don't know that we said that when you moved to Miami.
In ninth grade.
So he had lived in Ohio, then moved to like Miami proper in ninth grade.
Yeah, I went from a high school of less than 400 to a graduating class of 834.
Yeah, that's a big shift.
And Ohio to Miami. Miami in the 80s.
In the 80s. Late 80s, right after the Dayland shootings and all that.
Sorry to interrupt. So go on.
Yeah, and I was just I was lost in trying to find myself, and I had some really good friends that are like, you should listen to this music. And I fought it for a little bit. And finally, my friend Andy, who I'm still friends with, and you've met, said you should take home this disc, and it was Depeche Mode 101, which was an album that they recorded at the Rose Bowl. So while I didn't even know really who Depeche Mode was, and most of America didn't, they sold out the Rose Bowl because they're big in LA because of K-Rock, and they shut the whole town down, shut LA down, and they had to evacuate the record store for a signing because it was so packed, and they sold out the Rose Bowl 2 straight nights. And so they had this concert, and the first song I heard was Stripped. It was the first song on side 2 of cassette A.
Isn't that funny how we remember that? Exactly.
And I listened to that, and then the next song was Somebody, which is still one of my 2 favorite songs of all time. And I just kept listening to it and spent the entire weekend listening to it. And I went back to him on Monday and I'm like, I need more. And so then they gave me Camouflage, and they're like, all right, now you're ready for The Cure, and now you're ready for New Order, and now you're ready for Echo and the Bunnyman. And so now you got to start listening to VUM, which was the college radio station. And next thing you know, I'm just fully immersed in it. And we were, always trying to one up on what we could find and what we were listening to. And you make mixtapes for people. And I had friends, my friend Manuel was making me mixtapes. My friend Josh was making me mixtapes. And so it just kind of went that way. And then I actually finally figured out like a place there. And so it's a pretty significant moment for me personally. Again, this is just all my experience, but I didn't feel like I had an idea of what was going in my head until I heard songs that were like, it's okay to have those things going through your head.
And we've talked about that
I was
lots on
say,
here.
I think we just talked about that with Jagged Little Pill.
We did. And that's, Jen talked about that with Reba. I feel like, especially when you're at that coming of age moment, like Brant said, like life kind of sucks when you're a teenager. I don't care who you are. It's rough. Like you're trying to figure your life out. You're in situations where you are halfway an adult and halfway a kid. You don't know what to do. And when you find that right artist or group, or you hear those right lyrics, it's like Brant said, like something just clicks and you're like, that's what I'm feeling. Like, that's me. And then it's mixtapes were like the best thing ever. We've talked about
There's an art to it.
Oh, there is. And I mean, I can remember making so many mixtapes and then mix CDs. Like once the CDs came in the game and you could burn music, that was even more fun. And we had some in our CD collection, or my CD collection. You probably do too, but
I do, definitely.
Troy still had some mixtapes when he had his box of cassette tapes that we finally had to get rid of. But yeah, we have talked about that a lot.
Yeah, and it makes a difference. And and then however many years later, you're still talking about Jen's in here talking about Reba. You're in here talking about new wave music. We're talking about Jagged Little Pill and how when we listened to stuff, maybe when we were 15, 16, how it affected us, and hearing sometimes the same exact lyrics, how we view them now, and feeling them deeply, but in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And the good artists will do that for sure.
Yeah.
So what else you got?
You're the interviewers.
Oh, yes. Good point. Well, I see that you did some research, so I just don't want to skip over anything.
I have a question, though, since we're talking about teenagers and music. Y'all have 3 teenagers in your house.
Yep.
Yeah.
So have you been able to introduce them to the music that you love?
Not really. I'd say my oldest daughter is the closest.
Okay.
But she's more in the 90s. Rock genre. She listens to Red Hot Chili Peppers, which in the 80s was a new wave band, which was a college rock band. I liked, we listened to Red Hot Chili Peppers before other people did, because that's the thing. I heard them before they made it big. But we listened to Red Hot Chili Peppers, Mother's Milk, and even some of the discs before that. And she likes, she was in the Cranberries the other day. She liked, I love them. She liked Elton John. It was Elton John, but I haven't heard her listening. Well, actually, no. My other daughter, her favorite song is "There Is a Light That Never Goes Out" by the Smiths, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. And that's, I mean, if a double-decker bus crashes into both of us, it's really dark, and it's kind of cool that they would find some solace in that too, because it's so unique and so special. My son doesn't listen to any of it. But he has come up to me sometimes and been like, your music's not that bad.
Oh, that's a lot for a 17-year-old.
But I don't know that he's picked up any of
wasn't he talking to you about one of the artists not too long ago?
Oh, yeah. Well, who's the artist?
I'm trying to remember who he was talking to you about. I can't remember now. And you were like, yeah, we had this discussion about it'll come to me in the middle of the episode. But I remember you guys had a convo about it and you were very surprised.
And it's like you have to contain your excitement when your kids get interested in something that you love so much, because you're trying to be cool about it. And it's
it's no big deal.
But I listened to my parents' music and I always enjoyed it. But maybe it's because I didn't like what I was listening to in the 80s. But my parents listen to, one of my mom's favorite groups I just found out last night is Queen. So, I grew up listening to the Beatles and Rolling Stones and what they were listening to on the radio and some 70s stuff, which is not great, but some of the stuff was good. So I never like had a problem with their music. And in fact, my mom loves Depeche Mode, and we would go on trips, and we had a 6 CD changer.
Oh,
and
yes.
3 of the discs would be theirs, and 3 of them would be Depeche Mode.
Oh, that's nice.
And we would just rotate through, and she loved listening to for whatever. And she may not even understand, why I was listening to Depeche Mode,
Sure.
but she enjoyed the music. So I never had that riff, but my kids have not completely embraced. It's not from lack of exposure to
Right?
it, because
No.
I will not put other music on. If I'm driving, I'm listening to my music.
That's the rule in my car too. Like, well, I always tell my kids, like, whoever's driving gets to pick the music. So when
Yep.
my teenager started driving, he's like, guess what, Mom?
Yep.
And he listens to hip hop and rap, which I'm not opposed to, but I like my generation's hip hop and rap. I don't
Yes.
like his. But I'm like, you're right. If you're driving and I'm riding,
Yep.
great.
That's
Well, and
happened to
Amelia
me.
told me when she was driving one of the first
Oh.
times, she goes, I get it now. Why when
Yes.
you're driving, you want to hear something you like, because it's really jarring if you're not.
It's so true.
It is true.
It is true.
Yeah.
It's very
It's
distracting.
like the last thing I want to hear is hip hop and rap or country music when I'm driving.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
I'm just
Save
it's
me
gonna
from country.
go on a rampage or something. But they've been exposed to the music, but like London, her liking of the Smiths was from a friend at school that played it for her,
Oh.
Mhm.
and Amelia's found Red Hot Chili Peppers through school. So I don't know if they're finding it through me, but they've kind of directed there a little bit.
So they've absorbed just through
Yeah.
being in the environment of it.
I think
And you never
so.
know. They're young.
We've talked about too on the show and off the show, Brant and I have talked about this, how music is just so segmented now
Oh, yeah.
too.
It is.
Like your own curated playlists, and you can find amateur artists on YouTube that you can like there's just so much music out there.
Yeah.
I think, which is honestly great, but it wasn't like that. When we
Well,
were
it was
growing
for
up.
us because you couldn't find this music. Like we
Right,
had
Right.
the only place we found our music was at like records,
yeah.
CD record stores on Bird Road, or in the import section at Peaches or Specs or whatever, or college radio, which is why I actually got into radio, because I thought, if those guys can do radio, I can do radio, because they were terrible. Like college radio, you'd be like,
Loved
oh
college
man.
radio.
So that's REM, dude. Yeah, man, that's a cool song. Well, let's see. Let's play like some Smiths. All right, yeah. I was like, well, if they can do radio, I can do
I
radio.
totally do not.
But that was how, if you lived within 4 miles of University of Miami campus, you could hear, VUM, and I was lucky I did. So it was harder then, but it was even harder to hear music, this kind of music in America, at least.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But props out to the college radio stations out there, because I feel like that's how I heard a lot of cool music too, was when I was in college. Like, because I feel like young people are on the cusp of knowing all the things every generation.
It never changes.
Never
Yeah.
changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true.
What was the quote? I wrote it down. It was a quote someone said about college radio, and it was people who saw college rock as a desperately needed alternative to the platinum tedium of classic and top 40 drivel. And just amen to that.
I mean, that's true. It was
Yeah.
such a different.
And when
it was a
people look
different
back on
vibe.
the 80s and say, oh, I love the music, they're not remembering most of the crappy pop. They're not remembering Tiffany and Debbie Gibson and Expose and all that. They're remembering A Flock of Seagulls was on MTV, or The Police, and those are the kind of stuff that actually has lingered on, that that made it through early on. Anything that was on a John Hughes movie or those kind of things.
Oh, but
Yeah.
if you love that, it's okay.
Yes, it is okay if you love Debbie Gibson and Tiffany, and those are your favorite. When you guys were saying like
Yes, if you, because I forgot it's a different audience.
Not
There's not a
necessarily.
person listening that shares it, but
Not necessarily.
and they have their place. The Britneys have their place, and those kind of
Sure.
things. But when you remember the significant stuff, I feel, and so there was so much just pop stuff, that people remember Michael Jackson, but I guess that was a little more groundbreaking. But a lot of it was just all the kind of derivative of each other. So when people think back to the 80s, I think most of them aren't thinking back to what most of the 80s music was. They're thinking of those different things that pop out.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of formulaic music. We still have that now in pop music. I mean, that's what pop music is. It's a formula to make money. Like,
it's seriously like people
written by like 5 people, and they write songs for all the people. And the 90s was when it really started to get bad with just like forming bands and putting them together, and
I mean, advertising to adolescent, prepubescent teenage girls works.
And again, if it's popular, there's a reason it is. And
I know.
That's why I don't like
which
it.
brings us back to
which brings
his
us
original
back.
statement that he stands behind 100%.
Absolutely. I was just going to loop back to Erasure since I really enjoyed them. I've always liked their music. Well, let me rephrase that. I didn't know who they were till Brant introduced me to them when we were dating. And so I was like, I don't even know who this is. I don't know what anything is. And
she really did not. I mean, you were me just later in life.
Yeah.
But you had never listened to it. You grew up around parents who didn't play any music, and I don't think they would have listened to it anyway. Mm-mm. And then you listen to the music of your era, and then you have like musical stuff that you listen to, and you didn't have any friends that listened to this.
Right.
You were me in Miami. Just you were a little bit later in life when you were 10 years later.
You were stuck in your algorithm.
I was stuck in my own algorithm. And I loved Erasure. And we had a chance, like he said, to see them in Orlando a couple of years ago. Well, I guess it's been several years ago now. And it was funny because you saw them back when you were younger, right?
I did.
So describe the difference in the demographic at this concert.
Fun.
I mean, the demo was still the same. It's just we were all older. Yeah. Erasure, most of the bands I saw, in the late 80s or 90s, everybody was not sitting down.
Right.
and it was not in a theater. It was, and of course, Erasure was actually, I think I saw Erasure in House of Blues later on. But this was in the Dr. Phillips Center. Everybody was in their 50s and late 40s. And
you had your bottle of water instead
and
of
everybody
your beer.
And they're buying their drinks from the bar, and it was wine and all these other things. Yeah. And
they were in like polo shirts and khakis. There was a little bit of that.
There's some of that. Yeah. It was an older crowd, but it was the same people. Just watching it in a different way, because not everybody our age can dance like that for an hour and a half.
Speak for yourself.
They need to sit.
It's crazy. When I saw Elton John at Caesar's Palace in Vegas.
You didn't know this?
Yeah, this was, I don't know, probably 10 years ago now, maybe 7 or 8 years ago anyway.
It would have been, it was my sister's 40th, so that would have been 8 years ago.
To age your sister.
Told her by her business.
Oh, there we go. But yes, it was. Everyone sat the whole concert.
What?
And I just thought that was really weird.
Oh, I would have been the one person you know of.
I was like,
And to be fair, we danced most of the Erasure. We were up for a lot of it.
Yeah,
it was different, and I don't go to many places. I don't go many places. Mm-hmm. Certainly don't go to many concerts anymore. I mean, that's why I didn't want to go to Depeche Mode, because I was like, I don't want to see this with a bunch of old people, because I don't think I'm old.
I know, same.
I'm old, but I don't. Know. I look at people, I'm like, oh, they're so old. And you went to school with them. I'm like, oh, well, they're older than me.
That's terrible. I know. I thought the same way. We all
so it's a little, but Erasure is a band that still sounds great, and so they sounded great, and it was fun to listen to. Andy Bell's voice is held up, and because it's, Vince Clarke is just hitting a button and playing, because it's all. Yeah. It's all synth and programmed. They sounded really good. Yeah, and not all of these bands can say it. Cure still sound great.
Yeah.
I would still see the Cure any day. And then a lot of these bands don't tour or aren't together anymore. So
yeah. Do you find that there are any current bands that kind of have this sound?
Well, there are, and there's been resurgence, at least like in like synth pop. There's still a really strong an indie rock scene out there. I know what you're supposed to say at our age is, oh, this new music sucks, and new pop music sucks. But there's good independent rock music out there still, and I'll listen to new stuff all the time. But my favorite band right now is Churches, which is another group that we've gone to see, and that's still my favorite concert, and
that was so good.
And that is a complete synth pop band, and have gone out through there. I actually wrote down some, maybe I don't have it in front of me, that kind of fit. Shiny Toy Guns. I don't know if you remember them. I've played them some. There's a group called Naked and Famous, but then you could also argue that The Weeknd it has some new wave stuff with those. What's the song The Weeknd that's really famous?
Blinding Lights.
Yeah, that's a very kind of synth song. I saw something, I wrote it down. Kesha can be considered new wave and synth and some of the stuff that they do. So there are still bands out there, and there's still alt bands out there that do rock that you could say is influenced by Smiths or Cure or forging their own path, and it's fun to listen to that. So I always want to listen to new music. I still listen to new wave, as my predominant. When my Spotify will show up at the end of the year, it'll always be my number one. But I do try to listen to new stuff too, new indie bands, not new pop.
He had to clarify that.
He had to
just
clarify.
in case we were mistaken.
I will say though, like you're a Lady Gaga fan.
And I would say Lady Gaga. I was listening to her just the other day. I think you could say some of her stuff is kind of could fit into some of these categories. It's dance, it's deep, it's multi-layered. It's not just, and that's what I liked about it. And in fact, I ignorantly just thought she was terrible. And then she was on the Howard Stern show, and she played acoustic. She played 2 of her songs acoustic, and I was like, wow, she can really sing. And you're like, yeah, duh. And
you're like, hello.
But then I was like, wow, so there's really talent there, because I just assumed she was just like everyone else that doesn't have a lot of talent, is just singing behind a pre-programmed kind of thing. But she writes her songs, and I think you could find some new wave influence in what she does.
Mm-hmm. She has a documentary that came out years ago on Netflix called 5'2". Hi, yay, short girls. Anyways, and that's when I figured out how amazingly talented she was.
She is.
Because it shows her composing and singing, and I was like, oh, because I thought the same thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still liked her,
right?
I thought the same thing.
Like, she's great.
I love her.
Yeah.
And then I watched that, and I was like, wow, she's like amazing. But okay, so I do have a question. Can I ask a question, or are you going to ask him something else?
No, go ahead.
So, would you say that new wave did originate overseas?
It depends on who you're talking to, because the official term of new wave is post-punk.
Right.
And post-punk really grew here just as much as it did there with Blondie.
Right.
You had, like I said, Talking Heads was someone that came out of there. So there was like American post-punk bands, and Blondie can go a lot of different directions. I mean, they were so great at almost chameleon-like and morphing into different genres as from song to song. So technically you could say new wave started there, but I think you had MTV form, and MTV was like, we just want to play videos, whoever has videos. And there were videos from England. I mean, the first song they played was a new wave artist, the Buggles.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Video killed the radio star. I mean, that's a new wave band that was completely synth, and it was talking about how video was going to kill the radio star, which was basically saying technology is killing the people that are classically trained in this. But then MTV's just looking for something to fill, and they would play anything, well, except black artists, but that's a whole other.
Yeah, we talked about that.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But so they loaded up on like some English bands, and next thing you know, you had an Australian band like Men at Work, and then you had, like I said, Duran Duran, and you had these bands that were very good at making videos, where American music at the time just wasn't going to make videos and didn't realize the importance of it. But the innovative stuff was being done in England, so that kind of brought some of that over. To where it was more, not I don't say mainstream, but known here. But new wave technically began in America, but like you have also the influence, and I have a good quote here, and the guy was Lee Abrams, who I actually had the unfortunate experience of working at a company that he helped ruin. But before he did that, he was a radio consultant, a very famous radio consultant. He started XM Radio. And he would go to radio stations and album-oriented radio stations. Like, you should be playing some of this British stuff. And his quote was, "All my favorite bands are English. It is a more artistic place. Experimentation thrives there. Everything over here is more like McDonald's." And then Bob Curie, who was he was a manager of A&R at EMI, said, "Bands in America want to be signed to make money, while bands in the UK want to be signed to communicate."
Ooh.
And then you had Richard Blade, who was he's still a DJ. He's on First Wave. He was a British young man at the time who came over to K-Rock and was playing British music too, because it was better than what they had in their rotation. And so I think the reason it then became British New Wave is just because it was better.
Got it.
And the music was different, and it was experimental, and they were testing things, and they're from all the different regions. Like, you can look at a map of England, and you can see, Depeche Mode was from Basel, The Cure was from West London, North London, and you had Liverpool, you had Echo and the Bunnymen, and the Smiths were from the Manchester scene in Manchester, and like all over, you had these different bands who were all part of like what this movement is, and they all brought like these own unique sounds from like this really tiny place that was still segmented. And and just as we were doing here in America, they were going through tough times in the late 70s and 80s, and economically and politically, as I already mentioned, and socially, and all those things were changing, and it was so fast how it was changing. And so I think that lure was because they were actually making music that was good. And I still think it was good.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and we talked a little bit about that on our MTV episode. If y'all haven't listened, go listen. We do talk about that. How MTV, they only had like a handful of videos to show because like Brant said, American music wasn't doing it yet. So the handful of videos they had,
they were doing promo videos.
Right.
And
promos.
So it was basically
yes.
But then you had bands like Aha. Now, Aha, a lot of people are going to, Take On Me. Great song. Amazing song. Not my favorite of theirs. But they're huge in Europe. They're huge in Norway. They're still together. They still make music. They've had multiple top 10 songs across the whole continent. They're known as a one-hit wonder here because they had an incredible video. And that, of course, is the stop motion the cartoon drawing, and then he's in the box, and it became famous. And so that's what they were doing over there, and MTV's like, well, bring that over here. And then then America, being a copycat, especially entertainment wise that it is like, well, we got to start doing videos,
right?
And so then they started doing videos and different genres, but it was like you said, MTV was just so desperate for stuff, and then they had bands that were doing it that were actually really good, and they could play videos, and people watch them. And Iran is from Flock of Seagulls, same kind of thing. It was so different, and all they were doing is, if you ever watch a video, it's just he pushes the keyboard, he pushes one note, and the camera spins around, and he pushes the next note. That's all he's doing. But it was visually different. The hair was different. The style was different. It was something that people hadn't seen before, and the androgynous of people's outfits. And then you were finally able to see it. You didn't have, because you couldn't just go on YouTube. You couldn't just pull up something on TikTok or Instagram. You couldn't see the music, and then all of a sudden you could see it, and now you're like, wow, there's something different out there.
Yeah, I mean,
of course, I first heard it through my headphones, but there were people that found it.
Just so y'all know that.
Just through the vision, though. Also,
he didn't need the music videos. Okay.
No, I'm just saying it's not the complete reason that people turn to it, because I did not.
It was just more exposure, right?
Yeah.
It just gave more exposure and broadened the audience reach, right? And I think when you can attach a visual to music, sometimes that just makes it even stronger, because now sometimes it's not. Sometimes it just makes it even more commercial. But sometimes it just furthers the artistic expression of, especially, in that time, like you were saying, they were more innovative. They had more cool ideas. Like you just said, he was like pressing a button, camera spinning, yay. But nothing was being done like that. So I think sometimes. And
concerts were weird. Let me just tell you.
Oh yeah, talk
they're
about
just standing behind keyboards. It's a whole different thing. It's because
I missed my calling. I could have totally pressed some buttons and worn weird clothes.
Right? Yes, you could have. Seriously.
Well, I mean, you think about what was known at the time, and rock music, and to an extent, some popular music. It was a guitarist, a bass player, a drummer, and a singer,
and
who may be a second guitarist. And they all played instruments, or the guitar, or the lead singer was just, the leader.
Right.
But now everything has changed, and now we're going to watch Erasure, and Vince Clarke just stands there the whole time. Now he's got a great frontman, and a great flamboyant frontman who captures the whole audience, in Andy Bell. But like, he's just hitting a button
Nice.
and then it's playing because it's all programmed. It's hard to recreate 10 synth sounds over,
I love me some synth sounds.
know,
I
me
can't lie.
too.
That's why I like EDM still.
Yeah.
I'll put that on the car and the kids are like, what the hell? And I'm like, I just like it. Okay.
Yeah.
I love it's
love it.
melodic, and I think,
It
and that was the
is.
thing that came out of it being out of post. You had punk, which was just raw, and I like some punk, but it was a little bit before my time, like the real true punk, the Pistols and the the Dead Kennedys and those kind of things. I was like Dead Milkmen was the punk for me in the 80s, but it was music that was kind of, like we said, had a message, but it was melodic, and you could listen to it. I can remember, trying to be a headbanger, in like ninth grade.
I tried that too, that phase.
And listening to heavy metal rock, and Headbangers Ball was on MTV, and I found that the groups that I liked were the ones that were melodic, and I would be drawn to the Van Halens and the Def Leppards, and I wasn't drawn to the heavy stuff, or even Metallica at that point, and before they became melodic. So that was, I think, of draw to me was, I want to be punk, but they're terrible. I love the message. Yes, God save the Queen and all those things, but it was just terribly played, and it was loud, and it was. And so out of that, it had to change a little bit. And so you got like this melodic stuff. And the fact that the same people that couldn't play instruments in punk couldn't play instruments in synth, but their instruments sounded like they could.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever an argument, again, because I came to knowing this music late, that's like not real music?
Oh, it's that. Yeah, always is. There's probably still is.
There's going to be haters for everything.
There's always. There was definitely there. And I mean, I had friends that were like, oh, why are you listening to that? That's not, they're not even playing instruments. There's people that, everybody has their definition. I mean, I've certainly put my definitions out there today. Of what counts as music and what doesn't, and there were definitely pushback then. There's pushback now. I was reading about the new romantic era, which is what a lot of these bands got grouped into, and then the bands that were considered that, they're like, don't ever call us that. We weren't in that era. No. We're not new romantic. Yeah, so
we're old romantic. Okay,
get it right.
Come on.
But it's an idea of not being grouped in anything. But there's always going to be people complaining and saying something's music or something's not.
Well, kind of like you said earlier, and we've said a zillion times on the podcast, if it brings you joy, then it matters.
Yeah.
Right.
And listen, and all you people that listen to pop music, enjoy it and listen to it and play it loud.
Just not around Brant.
Just not
play
around me.
Katie said,
I live in a house where they play musicals all day long. I'm like, what one is that now? And it's like the Count of Booty Bod. Yeah, it's like, where did you hear this? And it's like some song that they've come up with.
The other day, my teenager, it was like, because Cooper and I just walk around randomly singing, as you know.
All day.
I know. And Kaden goes, can y'all please just stop with the singing for just a little while? I just can't. He's like,
She'll come out and be like, oh, is that the song you need for audition? No, it's like this Women's of Windsor musical or something. I'm like,
gets in her head.
How does it get in your head? No one's ever heard of these songs.
No, it just but when it gets, the only way to get it out is to propel it out your mouth.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's the truth.
So I'm around it all the time.
Many of those in your house.
And I will make fun of pop, and I think it's terrible, and I don't like country music, and I think it's terrible. But if that's what you like listening to, then that's your jam. I mean, you can do that. Just I'm not going to.
He's not coming to your concert.
I'm not going to share appreciation for it with you.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Well, I feel like I know more about New Wave than I
don't
did.
know anything about New Wave after this.
I think I did.
This will be the lowest ranked episode that you guys are going to have.
No. Look, if you guys liked listening to hearing about New Wave with Brant, you need to tell us.
Yeah, for sure.
Because maybe we'll make him come back.
I know Troy will like it. So.
Yeah. Exactly.
You got one fan.
Yay! One download.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't even know how to talk about New Wave, so I don't even know.
Did great. You did
great.
You did great
because it's so just all encompassing and it's so different.
It is. It's so hard sometimes when you can't. It's hard to place stuff in a box that don't really belong in a box.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to be like, well, where do I start and how do I even? Yeah, how do I?
Especially a group like this that doesn't want to be in a box,
right?
Like deliberately, like
correct.
Yeah. It's tricky. Well, thank you so much for bringing us this. Yes. Was there any other quotes that you got that we didn't get to?
And I wanted to make sure that threw Lee Abrams under the bus. So I'm
Okay,
glad
you
we got
did.
to,
Okay, check.
Check
to
mark.
bring that up. No, I think that's pretty much
Thatcher,
it.
check.
Yeah.
Abrams, check.
Pop
Reagan,
music lovers.
check. Pop music lovers, check.
I did not. Pop music lovers. I will never include you in the same check
That's true.
as Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and I'm not even gonna put Lee Abrams on that level.
There you
He's
go.
like middle level, but I would never compare pop music lovers to people as evil as Ronald Reagan and
Okay,
Margaret
we
Thatcher.
got that.
There we
disclaimer.
go.
We're good.
Okay, we're good. I think everybody's good. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening in to another wonderful music episode.
Yay.
And if you're a patron, stick around because we're going to keep Brant here a little longer for our after show.
Yes.
So you don't want to miss that. Although I don't know, like he's pretty much said it all, but has he?
Has he?
Has he really? What else is he going to
I don't
say? Oh, the roofers are back.
They've been here the
Great.
whole time.
Well, they stopped. It stopped for a while.
It did.
It did because I was like, oh, we should. In my head, I'm thinking we should have just started a little later, but
No,
they're back,
here
so
they
it's
are.
fine. So if you loved this, share us with your friends of all generations. We love all generations here on Generation in Between. Follow us on our socials. We are on the TikTok, friends. So TikTok.
Sorry, everyone. We got our first hater yesterday. I
forgot about that. Let's talk about that on the Patreon episode. Okay, and then
Sorry, I didn't know you guys would read that.
what? You didn't know what? Oh, that we would read it. Oh,
She got it.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Sorry.
Wow. I think maybe we should be done with this episode.
Yeah.
But thank you all for listening. Leave us a review and I don't know, whatever else we usually say. And
Something witty from the show.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.